Sorry, just a quick check. You can hear us, see us, all right?
Yeah, I can hear and see you.
Thank you very much.
Who's that?
Chloe is part of our team.
Oh,
Yeah.
Chloe will be doing notable trees at some stage.
we had a discussion on notable trees, but not in that Far North context just last night, didn't we? Yeah, briefly mentioned Far North. I lived in Rodney and I was the Rodney councillor for a while. And now we're an independent commission, and then when they come to do the trees in Auckland, they appointed me as chair to do the ones in Lannis. That's doing that. And you drive around and you look at these trees and you say, well, why isn't that tree on?
Is it on?
And it was
Right here,
system.
yes.
It was a bit better up here, I think, but even up here, I think there's a lot of trees. Are we ready, are we?
We are, right. We
I'll hand
are
over.
on and recording. We've done our sound check. I will just kick us off with a karakia and then I will hand over to Bill, our chairperson. So, Pokirongo kia rangi e tū nei, hoki raro kia papa e takoto nei, hoki roto ki te ngākau tangata, hoki waho ki tēnei hui. Homie, huie, tākie.
Thank you.
Hand
very
over
much.
to Bill.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and anybody who's online. My name's Bill Smith. I'm the chair for this district plan hearing panel. On my right, or your left if you're looking at us, is Councillor Felicity Foy, who's a commissioner, and on my left is Alan Watson, who's also a hearing commissioner. We've been appointed to consider the topics today with earthworks, temporary activity, signs, light and noise, and genetically modified organisms. We've been delegated authority to consider all the submissions and further submissions and the recommendation reports from the council officers. At the moment, the hearing schedule for the district plan runs through till basically around about November 2025. For those people who are taking part in the hearing, the Section 42A reports have been circulated, and we take them as read, although we will have the officers do a brief summary in a moment. We've also read the submissions affecting these topics and the further submissions and also the evidence that has been circulated to us. Most people who are at the hearings will understand that the Section 42A reports are simply a recommendation from the staff to us based on what they have considered so far. The outline of the hearing is basically the Section 42 officers will outline the reports. We'll then might have some questions of them. If we don't, then we will go on to the submitters who are either going to be given evidence in person or online, and then the officers will respond after that. And we will then adjourn the hearing to consider everything that we've considered. Before I carry on anything else, I'll just get AK, the administrator, to just outline the emergency situation and then anything housekeeping matters.
Sure. So bathrooms, if you haven't already found them, are just behind this wall. So turn right out of here, and there are more bathrooms further down if those ones are full. In the event of a fire evacuation, we've got 2 exits, and the meeting point is just sort of at the edge of the car park over there. Just to note, we are recording. It is a very sensitive microphone, and so we'll pick up even lolly ripper sounds. So just be aware of that. Please switch your cell phones off so we don't have any interruptions.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much, AK. Before I ask the officers to introduce themselves and then go through the reports, if there's anybody online who's going to be a submitter, if there's any questions you've got of me or the panel regarding the process for the hearing?
These are all our girls online.
They're all online. Okay, well,
yeah.
we'll now hand over. We'll now hand over to the staff. Who's going to go first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We might just do a brief introduction quickly as we go along while AK puts the presentation. James Witham, I am the team leader for the district plan team. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora koutou. Kenton Baxter, our policy planner, district plan team, worked on the noise and genetically modified organism and large reports.
Thank
Kia
you.
ora koutou, Jerome Wyeth, I'm the planner at SLR Consulting and the reporting officer for the Earthworks chapter.
Morena, I'm Annette Morgan, and I am the planner in line with team project.
Can I just check, has everything been recorded from those people? Because someone spoke a bit softly.
Yeah. Did you guys, Chloe, did you hear all of them? All of the team?
Yes, I did.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Right. Introduction.
Right. I think this might be you, Kenton.
Check it over here. Sometimes it just goes to sleep. Maybe off and on, just to reboost it.
Maybe we just ask you to move
Yeah,
the slides off on the
Maybe,
Okay.
or I'll figure it out while you don't know.
Okay.
Yes.
Who's going to go first?
We'll move over to the first
Find
slide.
out
We'll find out.
So I can't even do it on here, that's the problem.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Is that what you want?
So I think we've
This is now.
there we go. So it's Mr. Wyeth to start with.
Yes, we've got a few topics to get through this morning, obviously, so I'm just going to provide a bit of a brief overview of some of the key issues and submissions, recommendations in the 42A report, and some of the outstanding issues based on evidence that has been pre-circulated. And I'm happy to take questions as I go along or at the end of the session. So I guess in broad terms, there was a moderate level of interest in the Earthworks chapter, approximately 193 original submission points and 320 further submissions on those original submissions. As you'd expect, the submissions came from a range of different groups, including private sector submitters, infrastructure providers, government agencies such as NRC and Heritage New Zealand, and planning and engineering firms. Many of these submitters you will hear from during the course of the hearing. In terms of the key issues raised, I'm just going to focus on some of the overarching issues here. The first is kind of related to sort of duplication and overlap of controls on earthworks under the Northland Regional Plan, and that was raised by a number of submitters, including NRC, primary sector submitters, and also some individual submitters. The second kind of overarching issue related to sort of unnecessary duplication between a number of earthworks rules, which essentially require compliance with the same standards. And related to this point was some concerns that the rules were too activity-based, where they should be more effects-based, as the effects of earthworks don't necessarily relate to the purpose of undertaking those earthworks. There were some concerns around how the rules different primary production activities, and this is partly related to the notified earthwork rules, specifically enabling farming activities, which is but not necessarily other primary production activities. Some concerns that were too stringent and uncertain, and also a range of rules and standards. Okay. So in terms of gone too far.
Just a slide.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the key 42A recommendations are sort of a range of targeted sort of amendments to help sort of reduce unnecessary duplication of controls on earthworks in the Northland Regional Plan, and that primarily relates to provisions relating to the effects of earthworks on water bodies and coastal waters. And that's not to say that these aren't relevant considerations for the PDP, it's more to say that these are first and foremost regional council function, in my opinion, and also because the regional plan specifically has rules in relation to those matters. It's not necessary for the PDP to duplicate those rules, in my opinion. The second kind of big recommendation is to replace essentially 14 earthworks rules with a single rule which requires compliance with all relevant standards. In my view, this is a more sort of effective and effects-based rule framework. and it also helps to significantly rationalise and streamline the rules in the chapter. And lastly, just a range of sort of targeted exemptions for certain earthworks, certain activities, certain earthwork standards. And the key sort of standards here is standard 1, which is the maximum thresholds for maximum volume and area thresholds. Standard 2, which is the maximum depth, and standard 6, which is the setbacks. So a range of sort of targeted amendments to those standards. In terms of the outstanding issues, this is just based on evidence that has been pre-circulated. Firstly, just to note, there appears to be a broad level of support for many of the Section 42A recommendations from what I've read. But there are also some outstanding issues. The first one relates to the requested rule from Heritage New Zealand for a setback to archaeological sites. So you'll hear from them during the course of the hearing. Also exemptions to standard 1 for infrastructure, and also sort of common low-risk activities on larger sites. And we'll hear from both Top Energy and Waitangi Limited in relation to those matters. Last one is a sort of exemptions SF standard 2, which is your maximum depth telecommunication pole foundations. And lastly, it's just some sort of minor tweaks to the rules relating to earthworks in the National Grid Yard, and we'll hear from Transpower in relation to that. I think that's me. So happy to take questions or pass on to the next.
Any questions? So just one, I mean, the outstanding issues as you describe them in terms of what you just said and what we've read and the like, there's a large component of that just having not received enough information from that submitter about what their concerns are.
Yeah, I'd say that's correct. Like, and partly in my Section 42A recommendations, I sort of said I don't have enough sort of evidence to support what you're requesting here.
Yeah.
And so, for example, the telecommunications companies, they provide some specific planning that demonstrated how they would trigger that threshold for maximum depth. So that's really helpful, in my opinion, to support what they're requesting. So yeah, they're really sort of minor, I guess, workability issues, some of these outstanding matters, and I think they could be quite effectively addressed by evidence.
Thanks. Anything? Just a question regarding the duplication between plan and NRC. I say NRC aren't coming today. Have you had any discussions with the NRC staff to see whether they're happy with what you've recommended?
Yeah, yes, I have. I don't want to speak for them, but we had a meeting with them, I think it was last week.
I know you can't speak, but you can tell me what happened.
They started up really happy with what's been recommended, and said that they weren't going to appear at this hearing on that basis.
Thank you. Anything else? No, thank you. We'll move on to the next topic, which is noise and light.
Yep, so Northern Lights. We had 38 original submitted, 170 submission points on this topic, and then 25 further submitted, so 263 submission points. Some submissions came from a range of different organisations, government agencies, iwi groups, community interest groups, the primary production sector, landowners and others. So the noise, the key matters for consideration, helicopter landing area provisions, some definitions, additional noise provisions for rail lines, noise provisions that relate to state highways, giving effect to the RPS within the objective policy in relation to avoiding reverse sensitivity effects on lawfully established noise generating activities, exemptions from noise provisions for generators and mobile equipment used for emergency purposes, including testing and maintenance, additional noise provisions specific to substations, limited times for the use of audible bird scaring devices, and the interrelationship between zone noise limits, particularly between the heavy industrial zone and open space zones. There's a few questions on the noise.
Well, the noise, obviously, we're hearing from a number of submitters. Suppose I don't know whether it's worth waiting until they come, but we've got a few questions regarding obviously the 100 metres for the railway and also the road of the state highway. We stopped by here last night, and that's a state highway 11. How would this affect by here township for one thing, but all the other little townships? So I think we'll maybe leave those questions till then. There's quite a bit outstanding. I mean, I think it's the rail say they've provided the council with GIS maps of the 100 metres. Have you got them?
No, we haven't got those. I think they said they would provide us with them.
I would. I thought they said they had.
No, we
I
haven't.
must have read it wrong. That's all right. Okay.
Is that something you're going to address later on for us, and your view on that?
Yeah, for sure.
Through the chair, the reporting officer and I have had discussions on those two matters in particular. We're interested to see what the submitters have to say.
Right.
We've also done further research on other district plan approaches for similar matters. Mr. Baxter, Hinton, has done some work around that, and look, we probably want to see where the NZTA go in terms of their evidence today as to what our response will be, but we'll probably provide examples of other provisions that other district plans use.
And I take it one of those will be what's happened at Whangarei, because they've just been through an appeals with their boundaries, I believe. Oh,
Yeah, look, I think that, without getting into evidence, Mr. Chair, look, there's a number of ways to cut the cake.
Yeah.
And it's which one, I guess, makes more sense in the Far North context as opposed to anywhere else. And I think, I think there's a discussion over nuance, I think, that, that maybe needs to be had.
and after you've heard the evidence, and we've got questions for them as well. Okay.
I had a question about the noise, and I think it's mainly that everyday people don't necessarily know what 95 decibels is, or and I think as well the different speed limits. I wasn't sure as well, if there's a difference in what the noise experts determine a 60 kilometre zone creates compared to an 80 kilometre zone compared to 100 kilometre zone. So that was, one of the things that I'll be asking, and I know you're not acoustic engineer, so I might need to say that. And the other question I didn't ask Jerome with regard to earthworks, and might come up later. It's actually a definition that interrelates with the earthworks chapter, so I don't need to ask that now, but just letting you know I will be asking that to get an answer about the interpretation of the cut and fill rule, because that directly relates to the permitted rules that are proposed, and under the previous plan there was actually a diagram included in that, but it only included like one cut and one fill area, whereas I don't think that was helpful necessarily if it's for example, a 50-metre high hill. There might be multiple cuts and multiple fill. What's the separation distance between the cut and the fill face that's included in that height or not? So, just to have that question as well later on.
Also to let you know, our noise expert will be here. I think he'll definitely be here on Thursday, but maybe tomorrow as well to answer your question.
Yeah, I think that's a question through the chair that we can put. We've got John Stiles and Mr. Hitz and others providing. I think you'll find a question around what 40 dBA LEQ or 90 would be an interesting one to ask them about what the noise was like. But they can give you some direct parallels about, train going by or car run going by, which was really helpful for that lane appreciation of the noise levels. And just in terms of your report, much of it relates to specifics, and light standards. There's no real opposition to those standards or those controls being in the district plan as I read things. Is that correct?
How do you mean? Sorry,
Well, no one's really opposing the noise and light provisions per se. They're really just wanting a tidying up of it. Specifics as I see it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so in terms of the light provisions, we didn't have any submitted evidence pre-circulated acceptance of court of those provisions. So yeah, good and light.
There was no evidence, but I mean, that doesn't mean some of the lay people might not speak to us. So regarding the Mackenzie Basin, it may get raised, I suppose. I think it's the Mackenzie Basin, but not right.
Yeah, the that's I think.
But we've got no expert evidence.
No,
All right, thank you.
Further
Question?
Thanks.
And then in terms of the GMOs, there's 7 original submitters, 12 submission points, 8 further submissions, 45 submission points, and these also come from a range of organisations going all into the groups, community interest groups, the primary production sector, landowners and others. And we also didn't receive any expert evidence pre-circulated on its provisions either. If you the question about that.
Again, we've got lay people coming
That's right.
who obviously are significantly involved in this type of area.
Yeah.
Again, there's no, Mr. Watson said, there's no submissions against GMO chapter. It's just basically some tweaks that they want possibly again. I suppose my questions are more directed to the people who are going to come and give evidence, because one of the things they want is referred to as crisp. So it's not crisp, that new tech. Once you start adding individual names in, if you miss, then somebody's going to come along and say, well, that's not in, so it must be allowed. I mean, so that's one of the questions I've got for the submitters, and that you may get the same question as well later on. Right? Right. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That we've received, I guess, again, a moderate level of interest in the science chapter from, I guess, a range of parties there. Generally speaking, I guess, EPDCs, statutory bodies, infrastructure providers, commercial interests as well. So in terms of the amendments, and actually I cannot see that from that distance, so I'm blind. But in terms of the changes that were made, essentially they can be characterised as largely tweaks and amendments to kind of align. There we go. Thank you, Kenton. Just alignments and I guess some also clarifications. So there's a number of new definitions, for example, that help contextualise some of the rules, which I think are very helpful. Maximum area and and height of signs. So there was sort of some outstanding discussion on freestanding sign height and attached signs, and also whether we should be including signs attached to windows, etc. More clear evidence on that, I think, today. There was some proposals to, I guess, to include additional controls around particular signs in public areas. There is some outstanding matters around whether to administer rules as on the basis that you can be viewed from public spaces or not. So temporary signs, so in particular, Waitangi Limited has made a range of submissions on signage available to them. You will be hearing from them today. I want to double check some matters of scope before we issue the right of reply on those matters in terms of controls. So what was requested, we'll confirm that with the panel. Third-party signs, I guess there was additional limitations requested for it. We note that actually third-party signs are largely quite restrictively treated in this chapter. There is no scope, I can confirm, to amend that situation to be more enabling. And I guess a range of transport network safety signs. So we've also got key rail. I think that's a matter of interpretation there, in my view, whether we feel that they are adequately protected. Just again, it's perhaps a matter of how you cope there. In some general matters as well. Generally, we've improved overall the readability and interpretation matters through the chapter as well. So there is, I guess, a number of matters outstanding that we've from in particular today through both Waitangi and a number of some matters which are appearing. So look forward to hearing from those, and we'll make some amendments from you.
Okay. Question.
I had a question for signage again about the practicality of the, in particular, you brought up the one that I was going to ask a question about the third party advertising. Because in terms of enforcement for our very large district and group signs, for example, entrances to towns, they're very common. And in terms of the effectiveness of the plan and monitoring of that, that it doesn't necessarily have to be out for now, but later on in the day, if we can have feedback about that, because creating rules here and implementation of those rules enforcement is another thing. So later on, question.
So, well, with particular respect to the third party signs, there is no scope to, I guess, be more complete. I do know, I think in my report as well, but it is unusual to have quite stringent rules. I also note that we do have some control, and we do administer and enforce some of the issues that we get around major intersections, for example. Again, whether we need to be able to enforce our rules regardless of the distance from wherever office we have, we've got an obligation to live up to those requirements. In terms of some of those signs that you refer about, sort of the consolidated time sign approaches, look, that's an area, in my view, I don't think is particularly well covered in the PDP, and may form a future piece of work that may assist with removing some of the clutter, particularly around intersections where we've got, for example, activities that don't necessarily have strong street frontage. Often the reason given for display of signage off-site and in common publicly viewable areas. Again, the scope is quite limited, I guess, in this PDP to be able to deal with that. But again, it may form a future piece of work.
I've got one question which I'll raise now. You mentioned before you were going to check scope on something else. Now, in your report regarding the sign area and height, you refer to a number of submissions being received against the sign area and the height, and then you split it into two. And then when the sign height, you recommend limit based on some research you did, and the evidence from Mr. Badham on behalf of some of the corporate companies, he said you haven't got scope to have a limit, to put a limit on. So have you researched whether you do have scope to recommend that the limit be put on?
I'll put that to you.
You can deal with that later. That's what I'm
Absolutely.
saying. If you haven't looked at it, can you have a look at it? Because that's what the question I'll have for Mr. Badham, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll be coming for you. Because it does say you had submissions against sign area and height, but I just wondered whether you can find one against the height. Thank you very much. Well, apart from that, I've got nothing. Thank you. You want to move on?
Temporary activities. There were 11 submitters, 18 original submission points, 9 further submissions. They came from distinct groups: Transpower, Waitangi Limited, New Zealand Defence Force, and New Zealand Agricultural Aviation. The submissions were around distinct areas, and in particular, there are 3 areas of issues. One is around Waitangi Limited has accepted in part that my recommendation to extend and exclude them and have a week either side. However, they're now seeking in addition to that, and they will talk to that. The next one is Transpower, have not accepted the recommendation in my report, and they will talk to that. And the next one is the rules in which I have suggested for the New Zealand aviation, agricultural aviation. I had suggested a new rule, which is to insert permitting agricultural aviation activities in all zones. They have not accepted that. So those are the three areas of which submitters will be presented. It's as simple as that for temporary activities.
This report, perhaps through you, Mr. Witham, raises some interesting issues, particularly with Waitangi, because we're starting to get to a situation where all the provisions in the district plan will have an exception for the Waitangi situation, for the Waitangi treaty grounds and the like, on the basis that they may not get a special zone, so we better look at Plan B and give them a whole lot of exemptions, which starts to make a little bit of a nonsense of a district plan, and many, I'm not going to say in my view, and many people's views. Are we able to sort of give any interim direction to any of the parties that the panel may be going down a particular path? Because it just seems to me that here's somebody seeking a special zone. They're probably not going to get a decision on that for 18 months or so. But more particularly, we're going to end up with a district plan that has all these exemption provisions for someone that might all be circumvented by them getting a decision that gives them a special zoning anyway. I mean, were you able to give any sort of interim direction, maybe some Robert Scott to comment on more than yourself, but is there any process for that? Because it has only become realisable now that we get to this stage that we don't want their planning consultants spending a lot of time on exemption provisions when they may well get a special zone.
Yeah, look, through the chair, I think regardless of whether they get a special purpose zone or not, they'll need a bespoke rule. So one way or another, they're going to have a bespoke rule, in my view. So I hear what you're saying, that they're perhaps not, probably more be able to be viewed as a bespoke rule as opposed to an exemption, would probably be the way I characterise it. That kind of fits the importance of the site to both Northland and New Zealand, how we best manage the range of activities that occur over a couple of 100 hectare site is a different matter. There does need to be some nuance and thought put into it. And at this point, while we've had discussions with Waitangi Limited, we don't have the information to provide a better answer. I mean, for example, there's a range of commercial activities, there's general rules, rural activities, rural production zone activities. There's a whole range of activities and a whole bunch of particular overlays that apply. So I don't think there's a lot to unpick in that particular example, and I think that would be probably the most prominent example of where we need to look at bespoke provisions at this point. So there's an acknowledgement of the significance. I think it would perhaps be somewhat, well, it's up to the chair, I guess, to make the determination and the panel, if you've seen enough information to make a decision on whether a special purpose zone is suitable for the submitter. Staff aren't really in that position at this stage. We are, as I say, hoping to work with Waitangi Limited to be able to, and both parties need to be ready to be able to make that determination. It's a complex site. It's not just the treaty grounds. It's a range of activities, land uses and environments, which makes it, I guess, quite challenging. And we've acknowledged in some of these reports around Waitangi in particular that this will be one that we need to probably spend some time on in the wash up. What I would suggest to the panel is that once they've heard evidence that there might be some merit, and when I mean evidence, I mean evidence on special purpose zoning topics, that there might be some benefit into providing an indicative direction to staff to be able to start forming bespoke provisions if required. So I think, in my view, perhaps a bit early, but acknowledge that there may be a time where that would be appropriate, but I don't think the time is right now.
I mean, the other option, I suppose, Nalfa did their own special purpose zone, I think, and put it into the council. Waitangi Limited, because our indication was special zone may be applicable, but you should prepare your special zones and submit it to council staff to review.
Yeah, so look, you've probably received or will be receiving a range of information from us around rezoning, generally speaking, in particular special purpose zone, about some of those requirements that we're looking at to help expedite and make the process a little bit more efficient, and give, I guess, some solid direction as to what officers might be looking for to make a good, balanced, reasonable Richard.
Mr. White, did you
I
have
was going to add that we've got 11, I think, special purpose requests for new special purpose zones. So
Right.
it's quite difficult for council to sort of give some clear direction, given the range of requests and the range of levels of information we've received. But I guess what Ms. Wooden said is we are seeking to set out a process to set out that information exchange much more clearly, so everyone's on the same page and set out our expectations for what we'd like to see. But yes, it's quite difficult to sort of give a direction, I think.
I have a question about the interrelationship between the temporary activities chapter and the noise. I know that the temporary activities permitted standards, it talks about a maximum of 500 persons on site. I wasn't sure about how that would be implemented. That was one of my questions. And the other questions I had was about how that relates to noise. So an activity might be a concert, for example, with 400 people. And they may have noise from the concert. Just the relationship between the two chapters, because they interrelate in terms of effect. And if we're enabling in one chapter and not enabling it through the noise chapter, I'm not sure how someone can do the activity either permitted or that they would need a resource consent.
So I think, through the chair, I think maybe we could put together, generally speaking, temporary activities are, I guess, it's almost special provisions that apply over the top of any other provisions unless otherwise stated. So a good example here will be, I think we're hearing from Mr. Michelle around agricultural aviation. So there's quite a strong relationship between that chapter, or we're proposing quite a strong relationship there around, I guess, providing for, where, just to be clear, where we're not providing for in a temporary activity, that we fall back to sort of some of the noise provisions, or that it relies on some of the noise provisions for activities around agricultural aviation activities. There's a range of activities there. So that's probably a very clear relationship. We can maybe do some work on providing you with some just a bit more clearer statements around that relationship. But on the whole, the intention is generally that where it's covered by a temporary activity, that noise is less of a matter that's considered, keeping in mind that we also have other parts of resource management that can control noise over and above a district plan around best digital option, fair and reasonable noise, things like that. So we can get you some statements around that.
And just to clarify, in the noise chapter and how it relates to temporary activities, there's 17 exemptions, but the examples, for example, number 13 for sporting events talks about unamplified noise specifically, but there isn't. I was just looking for a provision that would allow for a concert or for a sports activity that may have a big phone, or I'm not sure. And I just didn't see that relationship between the two chapters in that interest. So that could be addressed through.
Else?
Not going 5 minutes, so.
That is?
So we're well ahead of time. But did you want to ask?
Does Mr. Barham, do you want to go ahead now, or do you want to?
Happy to go early, absolutely, especially for food stuff,
Food stuff,
because that won't take that long.
Okay.
I need to get the Wi-Fi password set
Yes.
up, so I probably need about 5 minutes. Just
Yeah, that's good. We'll
presentation off we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just say, I think so, that's question. Yeah, you just say what she's got, she's got. And then it comes to voters. They're happy with it. Did you hear your name? You heard the name. You heard the Jerome. I think it was a compliment.
I'm sure he'll look back on the live stream and just hear what you said.
It'll be such a nice commissioner too. It looks worse to come through like that. What's the time when I was taking? We did chamber conversations. School. As I grew into school, so. Yeah. It's not too good.
Come forward.
Yes, so I'll just make sure this is all working.
If you want Mr. Barham, you can sit there with him if you want to.
I'll do food stuff first.
Oh.
Russell's from Top Energy.
Okay, okay, all right, okay.
Just on that, I'm not sure how you guys are going for time, but I could call ahead to our Top Energy witnesses as well to see if they want to come, or would you like to keep them for after the break?
I will keep them for after the break.
Yeah,
We'll
keep
leave
them
it
for after
for
the break. Okay, yeah. Okay.
You're going to share, aren't you?
Yes, I'm going to share, but I'll just make sure this is all going to work.
Yeah.
Looks like the Wi-Fi reception's a bit better up here.
Okay.
So just to show you where we did have your pre-circulated evidence, which we've read.
Yes. So it's going to work. Okay, looks like it has. So, Morena Koto, I think I'm familiar with everybody. Been in front of the panel a few times now, and obviously familiar with the reporting officers. But yes, I'm David Badham, here first up this morning to talk to Foodstuffs North Island's submission and my evidence on that. So I've prepared a brief presentation, which I'll circulate via AK to the panel and others afterwards. But it's just essentially summarising what I've already put in my evidence. I don't think this will take that long. As you will observe, my evidence was quite brief on this topic. I will just briefly re-highlight the Foodstuffs submission context. It's in the original submission, but I think just highlight sort of where Foodstuffs are at with their stores in the far north. Where I support the recommendations of the Section 42A report, and there are a number that I do support, I think have been quite constructive. I do make some comment about the additional commercial zoning within the PDP and the references to the town centre zone. I actually think that follows on quite nicely from Commissioner Watson's questioning around the plan and changes that are happening but we don't quite have yet, so I'll talk some more to that. Consistency of recommendations, and then recommendations in particular for rural sign R7. Happy to take questions or comments as I go. Please interrupt me if you have anything that you'd like to ask. So this is just highlighting what you might have already seen previously in the submission and other presentations that we've given. So Foodstuffs is made up of several independent cooperatives, 102 New World, so the 40 pack and saves and 167 four squares across the North Island, and there are 16 in the far north. The majority of those are four squares, so sort of local grocery stores, but there are a number of pack and save and New Worlds throughout the site. Foodstuffs submission was really highlighted that the PDP will be integral to the continual operation and upgrading of the stores and assets in the far north, which it's committed to, and also acknowledging that signage, particularly within commercial locations, is essential for marketing and economic viability of business. But it's also quite common, in my experience, working as a planning consultant on behalf of Foodstuffs, a trigger for resource consent, sometimes unnecessarily so. Applying for resource consents for signage, typically restricted discretionary, sometimes discretionary, varies across the country, but it can actually be quite a big trigger for resource consent where sometimes might otherwise not be triggered. So getting the rules, I guess, balanced, in my opinion, is important. So obviously you've got to balance some competing interests, but in my opinion, if you can make them work within that balance to be as permissive as possible, it's better to allow it to continue. So this is just highlighting some of the recommendations that I'm supportive of from the reporting office report. So I think there was accept relief in Foodstuffs' original submission points. I've highlighted them there. I've also supported, and it's outlined in my evidence, I'm sort of just paraphrasing here, some of the recommended amendments which are consistent with the relief sought by Foodstuffs, and that includes recommendation to include definitions. I think those definitions have been really helpful, I think, and clarified some of the issues. There was one point that I sort of signalled in the introduction and I put into my evidence, which is around additional commercial zoning. So at paragraph 109 of section 42A, reporting officers highlighted contemplating providing additional commercial zoning, which I think is encouraging. It goes back to hearing one in strategic direction, where I made the point on behalf of Foodstuffs, but a couple of other submitters as well, that it was quite strange to see just a mixed use zone applied, and it's good to see that council are considering it. There was reference in that to a town centre zone. Again, I think having a town centre zone is a good idea. I'm presuming that's around Kirikiri, but we don't have a lot of detail on it. And the reason I think this is important, because we don't actually know the criteria for defining that zone, or the spatial extent of it, or the provisions that will apply to it. And I think that's really important because, let's say, for instance, if it is going to be in Kirikiri, Foodstuffs has a New World store verge of Kirikiri Centre, and if you end up having a town centre zone, presumably it's going to have some different provisions for signage and an allowance for signage, because you'd anticipate more signage in a town centre zone, in my opinion, compared to a mixed use zone. Now, why I say it's important, because I think this is a microcosm for the issues that we're currently facing, and Commissioner Watson has picked up on that, is where we don't know where we're going to go with this, but yet we're involved in this process now, in this instance, specifically in Foodstuffs submission looking at signage. We could end up with a town centre zone applying to one or some of their sites, I'm not sure where there might be different provisions. So there's an issue there in terms of, well, what we design now might not be fit for purpose when that zone comes out. We don't know how far down it's down the track. So I think I'm reinforcing what you already know, but it is an issue for a submitter because we don't really know. I'm having to provide expert evidence on the signage chapter based on the mixed use zone, but then Foodstuffs has got a broader submission that it's, thinks there should be more zones, and other submitters do too. So I do think I do consider that it would be beneficial for the panel and submitters to get some clarity as much as possible on this, because there is a lot of time and effort that is put into submitting on this and making expert evidence attending the hearing, which potentially could be redundant come a decision on the zoning. So I do think that decision on the commercial zoning, also some of these other aspects, are actually really important moving forward. Flexible size, so this is just consistency of the recommendations. Yes, this I just said this, but the PDP should enable more flexible signage provisions to reflect commercial zones. So this is kind of what I've already said. In a commercial zone or in a business zone, in a town centre zone, as I mentioned, I consider that there should be more allowance and flexibility for signage because it's primarily got a commercial focus. In a mixed use zone, it's a bit different because you're anticipating a mix of residential and business, so the amenity of that might be different. So if a town centre zone or any other commercial zone is introduced and applies to land owned by Foodstuffs, then we really need to consider what that will mean for the signage provisions. So I'm just reinforcing what I've already said, but that's going to flow on because the change of that zone will have an anticipated character and amenity, which will need to be reflected by the signage provisions. So notwithstanding that sort of overall comment, this is some specificity into the rules and some of the responses in the Section 42A report. So in particular, Foodstuffs submission was particularly relevant to sign Rule 7. And essentially, the reporting officer did not support Foodstuffs' requested deletion of windows, fence or wall due to this having unintended consequences. There was no real explanation in the 42A report as I read it on what those unintended consequences could be. It was left quite vague. But anyway, irrespective of that, I do not consider this recommendation, I do not support it, and I consider it's overly restrictive. It's common practice for signs and imagery to change frequently to reflect current sales and marketing practices, particularly on buildings and windows. And the rule as drafted will result in issues for signage on existing building and future stores due to unnecessary resource consents being triggered. So in my view, I think that should be deleted. And I've highlighted that in my evidence. The other one was permitted standard 1. So the reporting office does not support the requested deletion of PER1. I consider it unnecessary to restrict signage from protruding above the highest point of the building when signs are managed by a maximum height limit and sign standard 2. So that's essentially saying if you've already got a height limit for the signage, why do you need to manage it protruding above the building? Because it was already going to be captured by the height limit. So I don't think that particularly adds any real value. It'll probably just trigger additional consents. And ultimately, I think that a height limit is what would be more efficient and effective to manage signage in that way as a standard, rather than having an additional protrusion element to the rule as well.
I just had a question about the windows and the walls.
Yes. I can go. What I'll do is I'll go back down to this is the rule. This is the rule within here.
Yes. So my question about that was the cumulative signage. The effect of the building, the facade of a building, and the cumulative visual impact if all the windows and walls were covered in signage. And that request for and in your submission to basically delete it.
Well, because in my view, it's already on or attached to a building. The building includes the window as well. Fence or a wall.
That's what I was going to say. Is there any compromise of it?
Yeah.
So I can understand window because it's part of the building. So like I actually had a walk by here when I was today. Fence may separate.
Yeah, I accept fence
The
to be
wall
separate.
could be separate.
a wall would probably be part of the building, but a fence, I could accept that a fence is a separate structure.
So you could exclude a fence and you could have a wall, but excluding the wall, that's not part of the building.
Yes, I guess it would depend how you defined or consider what a wall was. So you can have a standalone wall, which would be relatively odd, in my opinion. I don't think you'd generally have many standalone walls. They would usually be part of a building, but a fence, I'd accept that a fence is typically separate. So I could take your line of what you were suggesting there.
Yeah, we'll just think that.
Yeah, I think, and as am I, I'm always willing to reconsider it. I think for me, a window is part of the building, so it's already, if it's going to be a window, it's going to be in a building. Fence, yes, we could accept that that's a separate structure, but a wall, again, I think would more often than not, I would struggle. I'm trying to think of an instance where I think of a freestanding wall.
I have seen one where they have these stones, you know, that they they build out of rocks, and well, that's totally separate to the building. But anyway, that you could have wording in there, but excluding. You could have walls in, but then excluding walls around part of the building.
Or they're part of the building. Yes, I'd be open. Yes, I'd be open to that, and open to that revision.
I think as well the context about the cumulative effect. You know, there's no actual square meterage, you know, in terms of gauging scale, you know, so scale and intensity and character. You know, when you look at because we don't know the zones yet, you know, if we look at the mixed use zone versus a town centre zone, and if you look at a 4 square, that is most likely a smaller building. It will have a smaller facade. But then if you look at a giant pack and save, the facade of the building, the cumulative signage, if that was all to be permitted, would be significant, particularly for all of the windows and all of the walls. If you looked at that in a square meterage.
Yes.
So different scale and different size of the two activities.
And look, I think this goes back to my earlier point around the zone is quite key, because, and this is why, in my opinion, and it's not just for signage is sort of a bit of it's not the key issue, but if you think about it in terms of a zoning framework, so for instance, a 4 square, in my experience in other areas, would more often than not fall into like a neighbourhood centre or local centre zone. So you would have a different level of amenity anticipated around that, and probably would result in a different level of signage that would be permitted, versus the town centre zone, which would, in my experience and opinion, more often than not have greater signage allowance, because it's a town centre zone. You anticipate business and commerce and advertising. So it is difficult at this time, the way that the rules are drafted and the way that the zoning framework is designed, to actually really target the provisions or the area or the height or to the level of character and amenity that is anticipated and provided for in a specific zone. So I guess to answer your question, it's difficult because we don't, in those different store examples, will depend where it's located. But at the moment, if we've only got a mixed use zone, then you're kind of having to design the signage provision for that context, when, in my opinion, for instance, Kirikiri or Kaikoure probably would more lend itself to a town centre or a commercial type zone. I'll just scoot back.
So just to clarify, currently the rules that I'm reading don't differentiate between the different zones and the different
I haven't actually got the full
cumulative signage amounts.
I haven't actually got the full wording up there. I've only got Rule 7, so I'd be only going from memory, which I'm reluctant to do. I'm not sure if the reporting officers have a copy of the
other
actual
than
full rule.
inheritance.
I don't actually have a copy of the full rule. I just had put up what my recommendations for changes were. So that's why I can't answer that right now.
So just clarifying, that's probably something that will come up to the officers as well, looking at the different zones.
Just to clarify, so what do you mean by different zones as anticipated? I mean, staff have no opinion at this stage on which zones have been excluded, included.
So there's community signs, but the matter talked about effects in terms of the actual facade of the building and the submission talking about the neighbourhood zone versus the mixed use zone versus a town centre zone and anticipated larger sign for them different zones.
Again, look, we just haven't formed a view at this stage. I think what I can indicate is that as part of the Kirikiri Waipapa spatial plan work, we've commissioned some urban design work to look at certain matters that doesn't include signage. But you know, there's requests on the table, there's submissions on the table for further zones. The zones are programmed to be considered towards the end of the process. There's further hearings after that, wash-up hearings and the like, that will probably be quite substantial, given, you know, obviously hanging on those. We have a very limited time, I guess, given to us by the Minister to complete the process by 26 May 2026. Yeah, it's very difficult to kind of, and I think Mr. Badham highlights the complexity of something that we're all dealing with. Yeah, I think it's very difficult for us to be speculative at this stage because, you know, how, you know, where is this going to be spatially located? We don't have any evidence on that at this stage. What is the size of those building bulk and location? It's a complex situation. I guess me personally, my approach to it is based around fun with context and what fits with our communities and environments, first and foremost, which could probably lead that. So any substantial change could potentially be, we need to kind of understand that interplay between what that change may be and what carrying capacity does the existing environment have for that. So that assessment and analysis has not been done. And it is a complex and dynamic situation. I appreciate where the submitter is and other submitters are coming from there. But we do the same. Officers are working hard to try and get some of this information to us, as I say early on, so we can start thinking about these matters with the panel and when sort of some further information might become available to us.
And I suppose we have to deal with the submissions that we've got and the plan change that we've got, submissions on that. Although in our mind we might have an idea of a commercial zone that's separate at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you have any more questions for me on that, or should I move on? I'm just trying to recall where I got to. I think I'm up to this slide. So this was just regarding permitted stand 2, or permitted 2 and permitted 3. So to say I support food staff's request to remove reference to sign S1 and sign S3. The signage will be attached to and directly related to the commercial building. Extended signage could be anticipated from. Look, it's all going back to that similar overall issue. So accepting and understanding the position of the councillor, which I do, for me, I guess it's a case of timing, and when we're going to know that. And I know there's been some minutes released on it, but I do feel this issue is going to keep coming up every time we go into this because of the uncertainty it creates. So council panel submitters are in a bit of an awkward position, and for me, in my opinion, it's about trying to find the most efficient way through this. So we, like Mr. Commissioner Watson mentioned, is that we don't end up drafting a bespoke rule for something only for it to be tossed out when we get to a point where we might have a town centre design. So my recommendation in the rule has been done with that in mind. So that takes me to the last point. These are the changes which I've indicated in the presentation. So the removal of window, fence or wall. So accepting the point you make, Mr. Chairman, around inclusion of fence, I could accept that if a sign on a fence is separate or wall. And then all that, so permitted standard 1 is relating to the protrusion and in the standards as well. That's actually all I had proposed to talk to about foodstuff submission. Like I said, my evidence wasn't particularly lengthy. It was only really a couple of relevant submission points.
So you don't want to talk about increasing the height to 12 metres?
So that's not in foodstuffs, I don't think.
Yeah, it is. Oh, no, it's Bunnan, sorry, yeah, it's McDonald's.
That's McDonald's.
Sorry, it's McDonald's and Bunnan, sorry.
Yeah, so
Sorry?
no, so foodstuffs didn't have that submission point. I imagine they didn't support it, but they probably are supportive of it, but no. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Bannon. And, I mean, we'll have our break now, with that, and then we can. sorry.
Yeah.
We'll
Or
have
do
our-
you,
Well, so I was just going to maybe seek some direction on that. So are we scheduled to come back from the break at 10:50?
10:50, I mean, what's the time now?
Well, so I was going to suggest if you guys want a shorter break, I can contact the top energy parties that are going to attend online.
Yep.
To come earlier, so we can.
can we
start
just
this time.
consult on that?
Yeah, let me know.
Yeah,
Let me
yeah.
know what you want to do, and I can get in touch.
All the rest are going to be online. Okay.
Yeah, apart from Mr. Fernandez is here.
Perfect.
We'll take a break and we'll decide what time to come back. and-
Yeah. I'll let you know.